So, super happy to introduce Dr. Bob Rakowski. He is the leading expert in functional medicine and clinical nutrition in the world. He lectures 4 hours a year, or 400 hours a year, and has been lecturing for the last 24 years internationally. He's been on TV programs, international talk shows. He works with a wide array of individuals, from cancer patients to Olympic champions, world boxing champions, weekend warriors, and everyone in between. So I don't know if that was a sufficient introduction, Dr. Bob. If I left anything out, please feel free to chime in. But he's going to be speaking on his concept called the Magnificent Seven today. So if you guys have any questions, write it down on the piece of paper that are in front of you. And what we'll do is a little Q&A at the end. You don't have to write your name on it, but just write the question so it's confidential, and then we can gather them at the end and go over anything that you guys have. So let's welcome Dr. Bob for today.
Well, happy, beautiful day. As I mentioned to Ben and Malcolm, Houston is a beautiful city, but I got stuck in traffic. Freeway was closed for an hour, so I'm sitting in a beautiful park Skyping, but I can't pick a better setting than this. I've talked for literally years about the Magnificent Seven. Seven seems to be a perfect number in so many different ways, and I always tell people that you need to eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, and talk right every single day. There's some pretty amazing information out there. I was literally in the front row of a black tie event where a guy named Dan Buechner presented his data on the blue zones. And literally what they found out through twin studies around the world is that how long we live literally is only about 10% dependent upon our genetics, and about 90% dependent upon the lifestyle choices that we make. And so there's this whole new concept called epigenetics, and our lifestyle choices make an absolutely massive difference in how effectively we can enjoy a healthy life. There was a researcher named Paul Blake, medical historian, and he literally looked at people in Victorian England around 1870, and quite simply they found that people got to be about 5 years old. Their average life expectancy was actually 80. This was published in the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine, and you can look up the name Paul Blake, but what they found out very simply is that 80 years old, only 2% of people in 1870 died of cancer, and only 6% died of cardiovascular disease. Back then, they literally did autopsies on nearly everybody, so it was pretty fascinating. So I've also co-lectured with a guy named Dean Ornish. He wrote a book about 25 years ago entitled Reversing Heart Disease. And one of the things they found is even if you have advanced cardiovascular disease with the right type of diet, nutrition, stress management, you could actually reverse heart disease. So Dr. Ornish did a study with the National Institutes of Health, and they literally got into people's genes, their DNA, and they looked at something called telomeres. And these are markers of our biologic age. So you may not be familiar with something called biologic age, but literally it's about how old your body functions. So we probably all know people that take really good care of themselves, and maybe at about 60 years old, you look at them and they're still, exercising actively, have great body composition. They can climb a mountain if they want. And when you get into their genes, you might find that they function like a typical 35-year-old. But we also know the inverse of that. We know people that are about 35 years old. They smoke, they drink, they eat garbage, they sit on the couch, they watch too much TV. And biologically, they function like they're 60 or 65 years old. So they took a segment of our population, and they literally gave them a fairly simple lifestyle program: diet, exercise, and stress management. And literally, in 90 days, every single person that followed the program had lengthened their telomeres and was biologically younger, which was pretty fascinating. So Dr. Ornish was interviewed by CNN, and they asked a very simple question. They said, if these changes are so simple, and they appear to be, why isn't that most people, why aren't most people doing it? And Dr. Ornish had a very powerful answer. He said, we associate pain with change. We associate pain with diet. We associate pain with exercise. He says sustainable changes must be pleasurable. And so what we found very simply is ways to make exercise pleasurable, to make nutrition pleasurable. For years, I've given patients really healthy, delicious shakes. We even have healthy, delicious coffee now, believe it or not, that's infused with the top superfood on the planet. And so we get people to nourish themselves with simple changes. Then we get them involved with exercise that is, pretty fun for them. So for years, I've talked about the deadly quartet, the things that are actually killing people. And I've always said that, I think since the beginning of time, it's stress, toxins, malnutrition, and now it's physical inactivity. So when we look at diet, the New England Journal of Medicine actually published an article where they called it actual causes of death. Let me make a correction on that. It was a journal of the American Medical Association. But instead of saying people die from heart attack, stroke, cancer, they published the actual causes of death. And they simply found out that in 2010, the #1 killer in America was malnutrition. #2 was cigarette smoking. They actually had physical inactivity listed as #5, but then they had obesity and pre-diabetes as #3 and #4. Well, when you actually start looking at the data in my book, it's actually poor diet, lack of exercise that causes obesity, causes physical inactivity. And they projected that about 2.1 million deaths per year were directly related to poor lifestyle choices. So when we start looking at malnutrition, we come to realize that we have depleted our soils. So Scientific America had published an article entitled Dirt Poor, and they looked at our soil, and they very much figured out that it has horrifically poor quality. When they compared the nutrition plants today compared to 1950, every species of plant that they looked at had significantly lower nutrient quality. And they've actually said that with each successive generation of plants, the value of food actually gets worse and worse and worse because of our farming efforts. So farmers had found out about 50 years ago that plants could grow pretty big and pretty strong with only 3 minerals: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. That is actually the #1 fertilizer used around the world. But it takes 30 minerals to grow healthy plants, animals, and humans. So as I tell my patients, I don't really care what your bank account starts out at. If you pull out 30 units for every 3 you put in, eventually you're going to be very, very sick. So we need to start nourishing ourselves, and we need to start paying attention to actually supplemental nutrition. Some of you may recall about 30 years ago, the National Cancer Institute had a 5-day program. They said if you wanted to prevent cancer, you should eat 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. And that's solid about fruits and vegetables. Studies out of Stanford show that people that eat the most fruits and vegetables get the least cancer, whereas those that eat the least fruits and vegetables actually get the most. So when we start talking about food, I like to tell people that we need to eat every color every single day. You want to eat the rainbow. The National Cancer Institute, by the way, says now we all need about 14 servings of fruits and vegetables. I co-lectured with that in various years in 2002 in Florida at a nutrition conference, and that was about the time that it released a book called Zone Diet. And in his lecture, he put up the USDA food pyramid. He had a really powerful statement. He said, if ever there was a terrorist-like plot designed to reduce or destroy the health of America, it would be the U.S. food pyramid. They had about 9 to 11 servings of processed carbohydrates at the bottom. Just not good ideas. We actually don't recommend any of those. So at the base of my food pyramid, I actually have food. And I like our food to be every color, every day, organic, lean proteins. Then above the base of the pyramid, above foods, I actually have superfoods. So there's a website called superhealth.com. They list an herb called Ganoderma as the number one superfood on the planet. Then they have things like aloe, spirulina, and goji berries, and hemp as superfoods. These are foods that have an incredible amount of nutrition to them, along with a number of other molecules that are really, really powerful. Above superfoods, I have medical foods. So these are foods that basic nutrition companies have used natural bases. They used to use a plant-based protein like a rice protein or a meat protein. But they'll add to it the amino acids and make it a complete protein muscle filling. Then above medical foods, I'm going down a multivitamin, multimineral combination, omega-3s, probiotics, and vitamin D. And literally, I recommend that every single day. So there's a quote from the book called In Defense of Food. The author's name is Michael Pollan. People magazine had listed him as one of the top 100 most influential people on planet Earth. And here's one of the things he said. Primary food quote is this: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. I'd like to say actually eat multicolored organic food, not too much, mostly plants. So when we look at the mostly plants, there's some people that have studied paleo nutrition, and they're of the mindset that 10,000 years ago, our ancestors lived on a mostly animal-based diet. But as one of my great nutrition mentors has said, you know what? Plants don't run very fast. So I think they're probably living predominantly on plants. But either way, one of the things we know is that you don't want to eat too much. It's a guy named Clive McKay at Cornell University, 1930s, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering essentially development theory. What he found is if they reduced the calorie intake of every single animal species tested, they would actually live longer. So from a practical point of view, I simply tell my patients, we're very familiar with the phrase little old lady, little old man. We're not familiar with the term big old lady, big old man. Because quite simply, big people don't get to be old. So we find out when people are obese, it actually accelerates aging and damage of both their brain and their body. An MRI study from 5 years ago showed that obese people had brains that were biologically, on the average, about 5 years older than people that had a healed body weight. So for eat right, again, not too much, mostly plants, every color, every day, and then we all need the supplement. So when we start talking about eating right, we have to understand that our body is mostly water, our planet is mostly water, and a healthy cell and a healthy body has most of the water inside of itself. So we have a portion of the water inside of our cells, building blocks of this. And then we have water outside of our cells. So in a perfect circumstance, we should have about 2/3 of the water inside, 1/3 out. Very simple test, non-invasive, called bioelectrical impedance analysis. And I understand that Malcolm and Ben have access to a unit like that. You can quantify the amount of water inside the cell and out. That's going to be very important. So what we know is that as we age, our water content decreases. When the sperm and the egg meet, that being, we can call it a being at that point, I will, is nearly 100% water. When a newborn baby is born, it's about 80% water. And that's why dehydration is so challenging to babies. Healthy young adults, about 2/3 water, 66%. Then we see with passing time, our body loses the ability to hold water, and we dehydrate. So I tell people that basically we start out life like really nice, great, but then we end life like a razor. But the more we stay hydrated, the longer we keep our youth. So a good rule of thumb is we want to take about half of our body weight as water. I'm sorry, in ounces. So I weigh 200 pounds, which I don't, easy number to calculate. If I'm 200 pounds, then 100 ounces would be the water I would intake. 5 additional ounces of water for every 15 minutes of exercise. And I'm a massive fan of at least 30 minutes of exercise every single day. So when we start looking at coffee and tea, there's actually a massive study, about 5.1 million people follow-up years, that interestingly enough shows that people that drink the most coffee live the longest. So I'm a fan of healthy coffee. I'm a fan of using pure, clean water to do it. I don't like adding junk like cream and sugar and all the other stuff that they put in it. But coffee is, interestingly enough, America's #1 source of antioxidants. When we start looking at tea, there's literally over 1,000 studies on the anti-cancer benefits of green tea. So we know that coffee and tea is excellent, and it counts towards our fluid accumulation. So we've gone through eat right, drink right. As we move into think right, my little jingle goes in that order, right? Eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, food right, talk right. But think right is really primary. So, I've never eat any food that I didn't consciously choose. I remember as a child, my parents putting green beans in front of me, and I didn't like them, and they said, look, you're not leaving the table until you eat green beans. But I still made a conscious choice to eat. So when it comes to thinking right, we need to put our health as a priority. But in order to think right, it really makes sense to have a healthy brain. So the brain is the most hydrated organ in our bodies, about 77%. It also has the second highest amount of fat in our body. By the way, that's second only to adipose tissue. So there's a very special type of fat in our brain. It's an omega-3 fat, which, by the way, is called DHA, or docosahexaenoic acid. And since about the 1940s and 50s, they started processing out fat out of our foods. They found out very simply that these very healthy fats spoil very rapidly. So they started changing the fat, getting rid of the fat, low fat, and that was one of the biggest errors of the time. So if we look at brain health back in the 1940s and 50s, autism had an incidence of something like 1 in 10,000. Today, the tragedy in our society is autism has an incidence of about 1 in 66 children. So we're not getting the building blocks to build a healthy brain, and that's a problem. We also see that people having major depressive episodes, anxiety episodes, at younger and younger ages. We have 1 in 6 white females in our society that are taking an antidepressant type. Why white females? Those are the ones that tend to go to their doctors more. If the other ethnic groups, Black, Hispanic, etc., went to their doctors as often, we probably have as many of them taking antidepressants, which I think is generally not a very good thing. And by the way, I can back that up with science. Recent study took a group of 3 people, or 3 groups of people. They took all these people who were depressed. They gave one group antidepressants. They gave another group antidepressants and exercise. They gave the third group exercise only. Initially, every single group got better, but the only group that was better at 6 months was exercise only. So we know that the primary input to our brain is actually our body. So as well as we move our body, the more we move our body, the more we make our brain function better and feel better. There's a great TED talk by a neurophysiologist, neuroscientist by the name of Daniel Wolfert, and he says the reason that humans have the brain that they do is predominantly for complex emotion. He says, if you were to look at a 6-year-old child versus a robot, the 6-year-old child has far more dexterity, far more physical ability than any robot that the best scientists could build. When you start looking at the thinking process, IBM has a computer now called Watson that literally learns as it goes, and it's sharper than some of the sharpest groups of minds on the planet. So our brain may well be to move our very, very complex body. So as I tell people, enemies of the brain are the deadly quartet: stress, toxin, malnutrition, and physical inactivity. Back to thinking right for a moment. It's now been proven that people actually spend just 10 minutes a day in meditation, they actually build strong connections in their brain. They build the brain that functions, that handles stress better. that is less depressed, that is sharper and calmer. So I'm a massive fan of literally just taking that 10 minutes a day for meditation. One of my great mentors taught me a very nice morning routine. It's part of every morning I wake up and I send 3 people love. And what they suggest is send it to people that have recently aggravated you. Forgiveness is, by the way, not for the person that aggravates you, but for you. Don't let forgiveness beat you up. I'm blessed to say that I don't usually have 3 people that aggravate me, so I just send love to 3 people that need it. Then I have my own gratitude journal. I write each day, I start 10 things that I'm very thankful in my world. I'm very, very confident that everybody I'm talking to in this group has at least 10 things that they can be very thankful every single day. And then there's a researcher by the name of Rakowski. She said one of the most powerful ways to create a great mind is to create your best self diary. And literally write out, hey, my best self is this healthy, is this fit, is this strong, my mind is this sharp, I have this type of social circle, I laugh a lot, I share joy, I add value to people's lives. And these are excellent strategies. So take excellent care of your brain with all the magnificent 7. We get to sleep next. Sleep has a massive impact on brain performance. Eat right, drink right, think right, cook right, talk right, every single day. So when we move into this concept of sleep, one of the things we know is about 27% of the U.S. population reports chronic sleep disturbance. Sleep meds are at an all-time high. They've now figured out that there's only about 2% of the population that can restore their brain and body with less than 7.5 hours sleep. Now, in my young years, my early years, I listened to some people that basically said, you know what, sleep is overrated. It was almost like a badge of honor to go on less sleep. And you were weak if you didn't. So in many of my early college years, for semesters on end, I would sleep about 4 hours a night and literally drink 3 pots of coffee during the day. I would finish my final exams. I would withdraw from coffee. I'd have a horrible caffeine hangover for 3 days or 4 days. I might spend about 12, 14 hours in bed. Fortunately, now I understand that, you know what, sleep is really critical. And I budget for myself 8.5 hours every single night. That's the amount of time that works well for me. U.S. has done military studies. They found out if the average person, in other words, the 98%, sleep less than 6 hours a night for 6 straight days, it's the equivalent of functioning as if you are legally drunk. So when we look at that, it's absolutely horrific. And imagine putting our soldiers with high-powered weapons in dangerous circumstances, functioning as if they're legally drunk. And they have, tons of issues with stress, malnutrition, and you name it, in a very rough circumstance, incredibly toxic. So the great news is we're taking better care of our soldiers. But while we're on that topic, there's currently about 25 deaths per suicide in our veterans. 25 deaths more from suicide than actually listed on the battlefield. So hopefully we'll wake up and take really good care of the people that are protecting our nation. So when it comes to sleeping right, you should fall asleep relatively easily, sleep through the night, wake up fresh without an alarm clock. And in most groups, when I pull the room and ask, hey, how many people actually do that, maybe we get 2 or 3. So maybe look around you, and if I ask that question, how many of you do that? Fall asleep without an alarm, sleep through the night without disturbing, wake up without an alarm clock, refreshed and ready to go every single day. Raise your hand if that's you. I see 1.
We got it.
I see 2. That's not many, right? So, and that's pretty typical for groups. So we've gone through eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right. Now for me, I'm poop right. Sometimes this gets a challenge. My kids, they knew very early on that, you're supposed to poop every day at least once, preferably 2 to 3 times. And I'm thankful to say that my kids are profoundly healthy. 23, 2018. They don't have a single extra ounce of body fat. 2 are in school, 1 is very successful in the national business. Balanced humans, 0 medications. I'm not even aware of a single trip to a doctor if their nutrition and lifestyle have been really exemplary. But I lectured in Nassau, at clinic, about 10 minutes away from Nassau Space Center. And I had a rocket scientist ask me, what do you mean poop right? And you'd be surprised how many people know what that means, right? In an expanded term, it should detoxify right. But while we're on poop right, you should have an easy bowel movement every single day, preferably 2 or 3, about the consistency of toothpaste. There should be no issues. You need to have enough fiber, and the colon function is type, water, neurologic tone. I can't even count the hundreds of patients that come to me over the years, and I literally ask them, what do you eat? What do you drink? Tell me about your exercise. How often do you have a bowel movement? And I see so many people that have a bowel movement about once every 3 days, and their doctor is telling them, hey, that's normal for you. There's nothing normal about that. Now, as we expand this concept, we're made of about 100 trillion cells. Every single cell eats, drinks, and goes to the bathroom. And the more efficiently we clear those toxins from our system, the better. So the skin is actually the largest organ of detox. When I exhale, I'm blowing off carbon dioxide, which is the #1 waste product in our body that actually builds acid in our skin. The kidney and liver work together to get rid of acid, and then we have bowel. And we have strategies, literally, to support every one of those elimination routes. And by the way, I am a massive fan of detoxification. I put my patients, the ones that are serious about health and longevity and performance, on an intense detox 1 week straight for about 2 weeks. Now that's not a water fast or a juice fast. It's literally medical foods, functional foods, organic vegetables, making sure they have good bowel function, drinking plenty of water for 7 straight days. And I've literally used this to tune up Olympic athletes to get them to win additional gold medals, world champions to get them to win additional championships. And I've had patients that have simply died, some of them 20 years ago, that are alive and well today, taking 0 medications, and many of us, much of it started with detox programs. There's 80,000 registered toxic chemicals in our environment. They've never been studied in synergy, most of the toxicity studies, and there's not enough of those either. Study one of these toxins at a time. The Environmental Working Group did a study. They found out that newborn infants are exposed to an average of over 200 toxins before they take the first breath. The World Health Organization says that 1/4 of all illness on planet Earth is toxin-related. And so I'm a massive fan of this detox. And I know that, and Malcolm can help you with that as well. So we've gone through eat right, drink right, eat right, move right, 30 minutes a day, every single day, known as poop right, at least once a day, 2 intense detoxes a year. And then finally talk right. So a lot of people may not understand that every cell in our body is potentially in communication with every other cell all the time. Most of us have heard communication called endocrine, and that's a broadcast message. That's things like thyroid hormone, our sex steroids, estrogen, testosterone, insulin signal. But so much more communication is peripheral communication. The cells talking to each other, and even autocrine communication. The cells talking to themselves. We know the very first cellular event that occurs as cancer progresses is a loss of cell-to-cell communication. So when I'm talking to a group like you, I always tell people, look, we don't see any of you in that group sitting on each other's laps. If you're eating lunch, we don't see you stealing fruit from one another, and we certainly don't see you pooping on one another. I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's exactly what cancer cells do. They don't understand contact inhibition. They crowd one another. They take their space. They steal their food, and they poop all over them, and they intoxicate the environment. It's about as bad as neighbors you can get. New data out of Stanford shows that they actually get about 8 cancer cells every hour. So there's a TED Talk by a world-renowned oncologist by the name of David Ames. By the way, sometimes I make assumptions that people don't know. TED Talks are amazing. They have over 1 billion views on YouTube. They have world experts that have about 18 minutes to explain really complex topics, whether we're talking cancer, neurosurgery, black holes. Stephen Hawking did the history of the universe in 12 minutes. I think that's the greatest thing about this internet is education. Some people might think that the worst thing is information overload. There is a downside to that too. But with that said, we get 8 cancer cells every single hour. Dr. Agus says, look, cancer is not a noun, it's a verb. We're either cancering or not. A man's lifetime risk of cancer in the U.S. today, 1 in 2. A woman's lifetime risk of cancer, 1 in 3. We need to not be cancer. Guess what? The strategies are clear. Keep it right. Eat real colored foods, not too much, mostly plants. Drink right. Get your fill of water and coffee and tea. And yeah, coffee and tea are proven to be anti-cancer beverages. So make the healthiest choice possible there. Think right. Stress, beyond any doubt, is the #1 thing that suppresses our immune system. The first cell that's suppressed in an immune system in stressful circumstances is called a natural killer cell. Those are cells that kill cancer cells and viral cells. So meditate, have gratitude, send love, create your best self diary. Move right, 30 minutes a day, every day, type of exercise, the kind that you enjoy. Some people like really aggressive physical exercise. That's me, but I've had trends, I've done yoga. Yoga can be pretty intense. I've done climbing, hiking, biking, swimming. Whatever you're in the mood for, whatever you enjoy, that's the thing that you're the most consistent right. Sleep right. Every single night, fall asleep without clock, sleep deep, wake up refreshed. By the way, melatonin is a phenomenal sleep aid. It actually buffers the stress response of the body. There's calming things like hops, lemon balm, passion flower, valerian. Poop right every single day. Do an intense detox a couple times a year. Bowel function is fiber, water, and neurologic tone. Fiber, by the way, holds more water in the gut. Certain forms of magnesium, one of my favorites, magnesium citrate, also adds water to the gut. And then finally, talk right. Fill your body with positive messages. Make sure that you treat yourselves in a way where they communicate with each other in a very healthy way, and then you get the most of your experience. You can use that 90% input to your longevity with excellent lifestyle choices. So with that said, I'd like to open it up to questions. And I may have to have you talk a little bit loud. Have to use my waterfall background. I thought this was a nice background, but maybe I'll step away from it. So questions for me, please.
Anyone?
I hear a lot about intermittent fasting lately. I just wonder.
Dr. Bob, what's your opinion on intermittent fasting?
Well, we all do it every day, right? Most people don't eat in their sleep. And so there's really good data on that. When you start looking at our ancestors, food was not abundant. And I think our bodies are really well designed to do it. We need to be smart about it. So what we want to do is figure out, how does your insulin signaling manage? How's your stress hormones? In a fasting state, your body actually elevates glucocorticoids, including cortisol. That can actually shut off the fat burning. So you tend to not want to go too long with it. But reality is most of us should intermittent fast at least 8 hours as we're sleeping. And then we start stretching it out, if you like, 10 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours. Some people actually are like on a 5-2 diet where they do pretty extreme intermittent fasting 2 days a week. But everything is a clinical trial. So I like people to figure out what works for them and keep that up. If it works for you, you should do it. But some people just simply aren't healthy enough to do it. And so, as your body handles it, then you should do it. Myself, I don't do a lot of it. I've done plenty of fasts. I've done some pretty extreme fasts. I've done 4 days on just water. Your body needs nutrition to break down toxins. Detox is one of the most nutrient-dependent, energy-dependent processes. So I'm a big fan of doing a medical food type fast, but not too long without food. Just really controlled intake, lesser calories, plenty of antioxidants, enough to maintain lean mass, and help the liver do its job.
Therese?
So I
Other
have,
questions?
I have
Did that help you?
Yes, thank you.
So I have a question on
Well,
Go ahead.
So I have a question on melatonin. I see on the supplement melatonin.
Yeah, can you go over the supplement melatonin?
Well, the reason I'm asking is because I've seen
yeah, sure. So
Hold on one
I
second.
love melatonin.
Hold on one
And
second.
there's some pretty phenomenal data that just came out last year that actually they find that melatonin is a universal antioxidant. It looks to be in every single plant, every single animal, even every single-celled organism. World Journal of Gastroenterology published that the gut actually makes 400 times the melatonin as the brain, and that's pretty fascinating. It's specifically a mitochondrial antioxidant. Mitochondria are the energy powerhouses of our cell. They make 94.4% of human energy. So when we take melatonin, that actually helps us sleep. It's not likely that melatonin crosses the blood-brain barrier. So what they found is that melatonin actually binds to receptors on the adrenal cortex. Those are the stress glands of the body, or the anti-stress glands of the body, and buffers the stress hormones, especially cortisol. And that's probably the mechanism by making us sleep. National Cancer Institute has done melatonin studies on end-stage cancer patients. They'll literally give 50 milligrams in a single dose at bedtime, and they actually prevent lean tissue breakdown and live longer. So I am a massive fan of melatonin. I have seen even young kids, some pediatricians don't like kids taking melatonin. I've seen it help autistic kids. I've seen it help kids that don't sleep well because of a hyperactive brain. And certainly I've seen it help adults. I have added it to my regime after I read about the National Cancer Institute. I do a 50 milligram time release at night. I sleep better than I have. I didn't measure my telomeres, but I feel pretty confident I've turned back my biological clock. And I feel and function pretty young anyway. So melatonin gets 2 thumbs up for me. One of the things I'll tell people is everything's a clinical trial. See how it works for you. There are people that sometimes get really weird dreams from melatonin. I've certainly seen that over the years. And since I lecture all over the world, I had a pretty powerful compounding pharmacist that found in her patient base, when people got weird dreams, it was actually a solid sign that they actually needed more. And as they bumped up the dose, double, triple what they were taking, usually the weird dreams would remain pretty quick. So as a universal antioxidant, in every plant, every animal, 400 times in the gut, studies on cancer, antioxidant, especially the mitochondria that make human energy. I love melatonin.
Are there any contraindications for autoimmune diseases with melatonin?
I'm not aware of any. So when we look at autoimmune, there's massive study, and there's a TED Talk also about autoimmunity. And what they said very simply is that medicine's been dead wrong and deadly wrong about autoimmunity for the last 50 years. So I'm in Houston, Texas, beautiful town, big town. I don't know if we have any basketball fans in the room, but we used to have a coach of the Houston Rockets. His name's Kevin McHale. He was a Hall of Famer, won many championships with the Boston Celtics. But all of a sudden, the papers reported that his 23-year-old daughter, Sasha McHale, died. And they said she died from lupus. And so one of my students called me up. And by the way, I have a really solid track record with lupus. Not everybody gets better, but most people completely eliminate their antibodies really fast. I'll explain that a little bit more. But anyways, they said, this guy lives in the same town as you. You have such phenomenal success with lupus. Why would he come to see you? I don't have an answer to that. But when I looked into the case of why his daughter died, she didn't die from lupus. She actually got an infection in her lungs, pneumonia, from the immunosuppressive drugs that they gave her to suppress the symptoms of lupus, and she drowned in her own fluids at age 23. Just beyond tragic. And now the data is very, very simple. Cell injury precedes autoimmune disease. So it's there's probably not a week that goes by in clinical practice. I see a lot of new patients, consult with a ton of them, where someone doesn't have an autoimmune circumstance, that they're consulting. So, in fact, just today I had a woman come in with autoimmune thyroid, Hashimoto's disease, and she's 30 years old. So she was diagnosed last year, and so I asked her, I said, what's the job of your immune system? She said, well, it's to protect it. I said, good, that's exactly what it does. So I asked her a question, I said, so does it make sense your immune system would love your thyroid, for 29 years and want to protect it, and then one day it says, no, I hate you, I'm going to kill you. And even though without a thyroid you would die. She says, well, no, that doesn't make sense. So the journal Autoimmunity published these words in 2008. Cell injury precedes autoimmune disease. When I teach doctors, I show a picture of a Marine, and he's a very handsome young man, but then he was badly burned in an explosion. And he had third-degree burns, the majority of his body, including his face. And his face was so distorted that even his own mother wouldn't recognize him. So I use the example, I say, so if this handsome young Marine is your friend and he shows up at the military base and he says, hey, let me in, you know him, you'll let him in. But he shows up so badly burned and you can recognize him, you say, no, I'm sorry, you're not allowed here. And if he tried to muscle his way in, you'd pull your weapons and you'd stop him. Well, when our immune system no longer recognizes ourselves as our own because they're so distorted, so toxic, so damaged, so infected, it's doing its job and it's killing cells. And so cell injury precedes autoimmune disease. Now with that said, there are some circumstances where we certainly can justify immunosuppressive medications, strong anti-inflammatory medications, when there's a circumstance where brain swelling may be an issue, where it can be life-threatening. But the FDA has guidelines on medications, and quite simply it says you should always use the lowest dose for the shortest duration. I had a 62-year-old African-American woman come in about 6 months ago. She had had years of lupus, and she came in with some pretty bad symptoms. She said, what can you do for me? I said, well, what can we do for you? I said, why don't we just make this go away? And she had this really puzzled look on her face. She said, what do you mean make it go away? I said, listen, we've got a really good track record with this. These are universal immune modulators, and that would include DHEA, vitamin D, two Chinese botanicals, one's called Gannicum, the other's called Gorilla. And now we know, especially for thyroid, there's another herb called cordyceps that are universal immune modulators that can be very powerful at normalizing the immune response. I had a woman who I just checked with last month, autoimmune thyroid, her antibodies without, and that's a pretty extreme case. In 1 month, she dropped her antibodies to 200. So 80% reduction in antibodies in 1 month for a protocol like that. The woman that had 42 years of use, negative, completely negative for the antibodies at 30 days. So it's very, very powerful to reverse that with the right program. And I'm certainly of the mindset, bodies can heal when given what they need. And there's only two things that any doctor can ever do for any patient. Body healing always comes from within. So if there's something in the way of the body healing, we can get rid of it. If there's something missing, we can provide it. Those are the only two things. So where does medicine come in? Well, if the symptoms are too bad where they need to be modulated, maybe there's a super bad infection that they have a good antibiotic, or maybe there's a tumor that they cut out. As a general rule, the U.S., I'll tell you the exact stats, we represent 4% of the world's population. We use 52% of the world's drug prescription. Something's not right with that picture. Certainly medicine is needed in some cases. I love it when it is needed. I work with patients out when they need it, but it's overused in this society.
How much sleep is too much sleep?
So there is data that shows that when people sleep over about 9.5 hours, they die early. But I'm certainly of the mindset that these are sick people that need that much sleep. So a healthy body should regulate itself where you basically, you fall asleep again without an alarm, and then you sleep through the night. So I've been studying mixed martial arts for 7 years, and when I tested for my black belt, the final exam was a 7-hour day with 3 hours of fighting, 10 minutes of fighting, 1 minute break, and after about an hour, they start bringing in fresh guys. I think that night I slept 12 hours. You know what? I need it. So if you have a hard day of physical activity, if you're sick, if you're extremely stressed, you may prefer sleep, but a healthy body knows how much it needs. But according to the literature, they are suggesting that 9.5 hours is associated with early death. But I actually think those people are sick.
Any other questions, guys? All right, Dr. Bob, that's it.
You know what? I am so honored to share. If the sound was not so great, and by the way, there were some Asian tourists that were shooting pictures by the waterfall when I started. That might have, I don't know if you heard their voices or saw me be a little bit distracted. I was a little surprised that they were not understanding what I was doing, but different culture, right? But I am honored to share. If we can come up with another specific topic that this group wants to learn, it's my favorite thing in the whole world to do. When I sign off on anything I do, whether it's a Facebook Live or whatever class, I always tell people, you know what? I'm Dr. Bob Rakowski, knowing that we can all be healthy, happy, and prosperous. And if I can help you in any way, I'm certainly honored to do that. So thank you for sharing this afternoon with me.
Thank you.